Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. The clash between Governor Dayton and lawmakers over the governor's line item veto to defund the legislature is now before the court. Joining me in the studio to provide his point of view on that controversy and the work accomplished in the 2017 legislative session is the Senate Minority Leader Tom Bakk. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Attorneys representing Governor Dayton and the legislature were in court this week. What is your point of view on this controversy?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation. I think the legislature was kind of left with no choice when their budget was line itemed out. So it'll be interesting to see what the court does, because there really are kind of two conflicting constitutional provisions. One says there's a separation of powers and none of the three branches can coerce each other. And then there's the conflicting provision that says governors have line item veto over legislative appropriations. So how the courts are going to remedy that, what conclusion they'll come to it, I think it'll be kind of interesting case history.
What would be the ideal outcome from your point of view? A special session to put funding back in, or renegotiate the tax bill, or where do you stand on that?
Well, I was pleased that the court did give us a reprieve until October so we can continue to talk about it. I think the question, the governor's raised a very legitimate issue on the size of the tax bill. And, you know, all the other bills were negotiated out. There were policy provisions that the governor didn't really like, but he was able to get a little additional money, and he decided to accept some of those provisions in the public safety bill and in the education bill. He now would like to revisit those things, but that's hard to unravel, because in the negotiations there was discussion about policy and money, and things were traded back and forth. The tax bill is the one bill where there really was not a global agreement on how much to spend. And the last night of session, I publicly called for the governor to veto the bill. I'm disappointed that he didn't. I understand why he didn't. He was worried about funding at the Department of Revenue for the state employees over there. But it's going to be difficult to get the bill opened up. I think the only way that the Republicans in the legislature are likely to consider is if our revenue collections continue to fall under the February budget forecast. And they are right now. I mean, February through May, our revenue's down by, I think, around $126 million below the forecast. So if we were putting the state budget together today rather than last spring, we'd be spending $126 million or even less than we spent in the current budget. So we'll see how the collections start to come in here for the months of June, July, and August. We'll have all those numbers by the time the 1st of October comes around. And if revenue keeps going south, we're going to have to find some revenue someplace and reopen something. I actually suggested at the last meeting that four leaders had with the governor that if people didn't want to reopen the tax bill, maybe we could reopen the transportation bill, because we haven't used general fund money for roads and bridges until this session. And we spent $300 million on transportation of general fund money in this biennium that we're now going to go into, but that escalates to about $448 million in the next biennium. So one of the suggestions I made was, if we're not going to reopen the tax bill, let's think about the transportation bill and just acknowledge that if revenue continues to go south, we got to find some savings somewhere in the next biennium, because I don't think any of us want to hand off to the next governor and the next legislature after the 2018 election a budget that's not in balance. So I think our success before October 1st, I think, is probably predicated on how revenue collections come in over the next 3 months.
Well, Governor Dayton continually stressed his concern for maintaining budget stability in the future, and that's sort of what you're talking about. So what was accomplished this session in terms of budget stability?
Well, the governor and the Republicans both agreed to some things that I didn't support. The early health care rebate that was done in January, the 25% premium reduction.
The reinsurance part?
No, the earlier one, the rebate,
okay,
the 25% rebate, was a poorly crafted plan. And it seems like the administration or the Republicans were unwilling because they felt some urgency because of the premium hikes to just do something. And it wasn't means tested at all, so somebody making millions of dollars a year are going to get their health care premiums reduced by 25%. Not necessary. So it was, and then so that was one of the challenges. It wasn't means tested in any way, and the other was they took $350 million or so out of the state's budget reserve to pay for it. Well, it was the Senate in 2014 that created the budget reserve mechanism we have today. That were in November, if there's a budget surplus, a third of any surplus automatically goes to our reserve. That was the Senate provision that we did in 14. Senator Skoye and myself, and we felt very strongly about building a strong budget reserve for when the next recession comes. So when the first bill that we send out takes money out of the budget reserve, that was concerning to me. And then the reinsurance plan that was done to essentially try and expand access, to get insurance companies to look at some markets, some counties that they're not in right now in the exchange, for the state to buy down some of the risk in the individual insurance market. That was paid for with $400 million out of the Healthcare Access Fund. The money that supports the Healthcare Access Fund is sunsetting in 2019. So that was $400 million. So that money's not going to be there going forward to continue that program. And then they took $142 million of general fund. So that total was $542 million. The governor let that bill become law rather than veto it. He let it become law without his signature. I actually called him the night before he did that and asked him to veto that bill also, because I don't know where we're going to find $542 million 2 years from now. If the program turns out to be a success and access to health care is expanded and it helps with premiums, we're going to want to continue that. But how do we do that when it was, when the first time, this time, was done with one-time money? So I think there should have been some kind of an assessment on healthcare providers or insurance companies to pay for that, not a pot of money that's going to go away.
So perhaps something to bring up next session?
Well, probably not in an election year. I don't think the House is going to be willing to do that, to raise any kind of new revenue in an election year. So those were the two pieces I think that probably weren't well crafted or not thought through well enough.
You were satisfied with the progress this session?
Other than that, I think it was a pretty good session. I mean, we put a bunch of new money into K-12, 2% and 2% on the formula, and some additional $50 million into early childhood funding. So overall, I think it was a pretty good session from a spending standpoint. It's just that the tax bill was a little bit too big and might lead us to future deficits.
You are known as a pro-labor lawmaker. How would you rate this session for labor interests?
Difficult. They found themselves very much on defense. And I think the governor fought off most of the things that labor would have felt were egregious. I helped with some of that on the last night in the state government bill. There was a really troubling provision for the state's public employees that I was able to negotiate out of the bill after the governor had included it in the bill negotiated with the Republicans. But Education Minnesota feels a little bit nicked up because of some teacher licensure provisions that the governor negotiated that he now would like to revisit, I think, when he's given it a little bit of thought. But overall, thanks to the governor, the preemption issue, limiting the authority of local governments to do things over and above the state law in the area of working conditions, the governor vetoed that. That was probably a pretty big win for labor. So I think maybe, other than maybe that couple provisions in the education bill, I think labor came out of the session okay. The trades, I think, are probably especially happy with a bunch of new money going into transportation, roads and bridges, construction, and a $995 million bonding bill is going to put a lot of people to work.
Absolutely. If you were addressing a group of middle-income Minnesotans, what accomplishments would you underline? What can they be happy about? Depends
on where you go. I think if you're out in agricultural country, the provision in the tax bill that provides for a tax credit to buy down school operating levies is a really, really big deal. out in ag country. If you're in one of the northern counties that have a lot of public land, there's some additional money in the payment in lieu of taxes that's paid on public land to counties to buy down the property tax burdens. So I think it depends on where you go. If you're somebody with a young family, you're probably happy about the additional funding for early childhood. So that overall, there's geographically, I think everybody can feel like they probably had some benefits of the session.
One last question for you. One area of the state budget that's expected to continue to grow into the future is Health and Human Services. What are your thoughts on how the state's going to tackle that problem?
You know, it's a problem in more than just Minnesota. I mean, you see they're working on it in Washington, D.C. You know, we have a society that's graying. And the older you get, the more your healthcare costs go up. And there are just more and more of us moving into those final years where you're going to be much larger utilizers of the healthcare system. So those costs are going to continue to grow. And we're going to have to figure out how we get our arms around it. And the one place I think we need federal action is something needs to happen with the cost of prescription drugs. I believe that prescription drugs are about over 20% of the cost of your healthcare insurance now. I think that's a place where we could use some price controls. And I know the pharmaceutical companies will hate that, and it may have some impact on research on new drugs, but those costs just keep continuing to rise just exponentially. And all I have to do is watch TV. Anybody will tell you, you see all the advertising being done for drugs that we've never ever heard of. Now, it's definitely a contributing factor in longevity, but there's a lot of prescription drugs being developed all the time, and we're going to have to get our arms around the cost of it.
Senator Bakk, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.